Hello, my name's Naoise Mac Sweeney, and I have been asked to talk to you for about 10 minutes or so on writing research proposals or research plans for two different purposes, for A, job hunting, and B, for grant applications. Now, as I gather, James is also going to be discussing the same topic, but from a slightly different perspective. As you can see from my title slide, I'm based at University of Leicester, so that is kind of a provincial university. It's a non-Oxbridge university, obviously. And in terms of job applications to a university like mine, there are perhaps some different considerations to other types of universities. So I'll be kind of trying to factor that in as I go along. Now, obviously, the question of how you write a research proposal for a job application and for a grant application, they're two different things fundamentally. You're trying to achieve different ends. And you're going to have to write these research proposals in different ways in order to achieve those ends. However, having said that, there are some common elements to both types of research proposals, and that's what I'm going to start off with here. You'll just see the picture on this initial title slide is a woman who is reading a scroll. That's meant to be me if I am reading your research proposal, either if I'm reading it in the capacity of somebody who is on a shortlisting committee for a job, or as somebody who is assessing a grant application. And that I've chosen this picture because it's the one thing I want to kind of highlight from this talk. Obviously, the most important thing in any research proposal, in any job application, is you. But in order to get you and your ideas across, you have to think about me, right, the reader, and try and communicate to your readers as clearly and effectively as possible. So I've put this image here just to remind us that the whole point of writing research proposals is to communicate your research to your reader. So have your reader in mind is basically what I'm trying to say with this. Right, so what are the key elements which oh, is this actually going to work? What are the key elements? Oh, yes, it is. What are the key elements which are common to all strong research proposals? Now, as far as I see it, I think there are four things that any good research proposal should be communicating to its readers. The first, and I've kind of ranked them here in order of importance, right? The first and most important thing is a very clearly expressed idea of what it is that you want to achieve in your research. Okay, what is going to have changed as a result of you doing the research, which wasn't the case before you started your research? So that's got to be absolutely crystal clear to the reader. It might be crystal clear to you, at least I hope it is, and if it's not crystal clear to you, it certainly won't be to the reader, but it has to be clear to the reader. The second thing, which depends on that, obviously you can't have anything else unless you have that. The second thing which depends on that is having a very clear idea about why this thing that you hope to achieve, why it matters, right? And there's many different ways to define why something matters. I'm not necessarily talking about impact with a capital I in the kind of a ref sense, but basically why it's important, why you think it's worth your time and effort to do research into, and why is it worth somebody else either giving you money to do research into, or trusting in that research and giving you a job. I'm going to come back to number two later because it's quite nebulous. So those are the first two important things. The third most important thing is feasibility. Is this a project which, however wonderful it is, however important it is, can it actually be carried out? What are the likelihood that it can be carried out in a kind of manageable way? And the last one of these things is basically coming back to you, your ability to pull this, fantastic scheme, this tremendous plan, to pull it off, basically. And these all feed off each other. So these are very much in order of the hierarchy here. And if there are two which are more important than the others, it is these first two, right? Numbers 3 and 4, you'll often get to in later parts of a research proposal. Sometimes, several paragraphs later, depending on the length of the research proposal you have to play with. But these points number 1 and 2, if I'm reading a research proposal, if I'm asked to assess a research proposal, I would hope to see these in the opening paragraph. So you know immediately what it is this research is about, and immediately why I or anyone else should care about this research. And I think these are absolutely vital. Now, I said I was going to come back to this number 2 in a bit more detail, this idea of why your research matters. And this often, this can be very hard to articulate because there's different directions in which this can go, right? And as far as I see, I think there are 3 more or less different kind of directions that this can go. And this is where you have to tailor it to the context. And this is where research proposals for grant applications diverge from research proposals in a job application, right? And I'll explain this as I go along. So the first and perhaps the most obvious reason why a piece of research might matter is because it's going to have an impact on the discipline. That you are going to change people's understanding about Ciceronian uses of the past participle, or you're going to change people's understanding about how Roman soldiers used latrines on Hadrian's Wall, right? So there's an impact on the discipline, and that's perhaps the easiest thing to articulate. What mindsets, what approaches, what frameworks of knowledge within your discipline is your research going to change or revolutionize, hopefully, and transform? Okay, so that's the most straightforward, the academic, the scholarly impact. The second strand is kind of a broader sense of kind of impact on society, and I mean this both in a kind of a ref way, right? So with a capital I, impact, you're going to have an impact case study out of your work. But I also mean it in perhaps in a slightly softer way as well. Is your research the kind of thing that might be interesting to prospective students who would like to apply to a university? Is it the kind of thing that you might be able to roll out and bring to schools on outreach and public engagement days and activities? For example, do you do something on telling the future, foretelling, Babylonian priests foretelling the future using liver exdispathy, right? That's the kind of thing which potentially you might be able to get school kids enthused about. It's something which could be great for outreach and engagement. And this is something where I suspect different universities might place different emphases on these. And certainly for a university like mine, Leicester, which is a provincial university, it doesn't have perhaps the funds and the storied past of some other great institutions. But what it really cares about very deeply is engagement with the local community, outreach and public engagement, and especially engagement with the very diverse local communities within the city of Leicester itself. So for us, that would be very important. Now this is where you have to tailor that to whatever it is you're applying for. So that might be much more important for a university like Leicester than it might be for another university. But similarly, that kind of impact, this kind of second bullet point of impact, may be more important for some grant funders as opposed to others. So very famously, the ERC, that's the European Research Council, is not very interested in impact on society. All it really cares about is impact on the discipline. In comparison, the AHRC is very keen on impact in society. Leverhulme, for example, lies somewhere between the two. Leverhulme is much more interested in kind of cross-disciplinary working and methodological innovation. So know your audience, basically, coming back to that idea of knowing your audience. What is the university you're applying to if it's a job application, or what is the funding body you're applying to if it's a grant application, and how far are they interested in these different types of impacts? Do they put more emphasis on the impact within discipline, or is it going to be important for them too that you have an impact on wider society? So this is all part of the why it matters. Now, the third bullet point here is only really relates to an academic job application. And that's how your research fits in with the department and existing staff. So again, if the department you're applying to has a specialism in epic poetry, and this is something that you can add to. Then you say it is very important to say that your research matters because it can bolster and strengthen and consolidate existing expertise. So this kind of why it matters is the key place where you tailor your research proposal to your audience, and to try and see what you're trying to do essentially is to build a link between you and them, to help them see how your research is going to be beneficial to them in some kinds of way, them in the way in terms, in the broader sense, in the sense of what they care about. Okay, so for example, like the HRC, they care about social impact rather than them as individuals, if you see what I mean. So this point number 2, communicating why your research matters, is absolutely vital. Now, what I thought I'd kind of end up with today is sharing a little bit of my dirty laundry, and showing you some funding applications, just very briefly, which I have written in my time. And I've got an example of an unsuccessful funding application. This is the abstract of a grant proposal I wrote for an ERC starting grant in 2012. It was absolutely disastrous. I didn't get past any of not even the first level, and it came back with quite quite harsh comments, but actually very fair comments, and comments which I've learned a lot from. So I'm just going to share that with you and show you my failures, as it were. All right, so this was an unsuccessful proposal. You don't need to read all of this. What I'd just like to highlight for you are the kind of the key structural points in terms of those points 1, 2, 3, 4, which I mentioned earlier. So in the first kind of paragraph, I've gone for a waffle about kind of war and conflict and how it's complex. And I've kind of got around to explaining why my research topic matters, because it's not really very well understood, and it's certainly not very well understood in the past as opposed to the present. That's kind of addressing point number 2, but it's addressing the point number 2 in an extremely waffly, roundabout way, and it's not really being successful in building any bridges. It doesn't tell you what piece of knowledge, where in the discipline am I moving forward, and it doesn't tell me anything about social impact. So it's kind of addressing point number 2, but not really, right? And then this sentence in the second paragraph is kind of addressing point number 1. It's kind of saying, this is a project which focuses on this issue, the transition between war and peace, and it's going to consider this, right? It doesn't make any actual statement about what this project is going to achieve. Instead, it says, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to consider things, I'm going to think about things, which is great. We can all consider things, we can all think about things, but a funder especially would like to see you achieving something, not just having a little bit of a think about things. So in conclusion, just this kind of piece, I think it's enough. You should be able to tell from this piece, and I leave you to read it at your will and laugh at me all you like. But it is woolly, it's waffly, it doesn't tell you what I want to achieve, and it doesn't tell you why that is important. Now, to end on a slightly more positive note, I'm going to just share a funding proposal which was actually successful, which I wrote again to the ERC, this time for a consolidated grant, because I'm a bit older now, last year, 2019. So this was a successful grant, and it went through all the hoops, fortunately. And I think part of it is down to the extra practice that I'd had in writing more and more proposals. Now, again, you don't need to read all of this, but if I just fill out a couple of things for you, the first line, the first sentence is that point number 1. What is this project going to do? What is it going to achieve? Here, in the first few words, I say it is going to create a new model, right? A new model for understanding things. That's what it's going to do. So it sets out that point number 1. Immediately. It then, before that end of that first paragraph, it sets out point number 2. There's something very specific, it's not a general area which is poorly understood. There's a specific point which is poorly understood, and there's a specific academic debate around a specific term. Now, this sounds very narrow and that might be quite boring, but it is more specific and you can pin it down. So this is what it's going to solve. So this is what I'm going to do in green. This is what it's going to solve, the scholarly debate, the scholarly impact in blue. How is it going to do that? It's, again, some key words here. So new data, there is a new body of data which has already been generated, and there is a new methodology surrounding multi-scalar migration, so migration on different scales. So highlighting data and methodology straight away, in which kind of flags the feasibility of the project. And then within the end of this, I've edited it slightly just to kind of fit it on the page. Within this abstract, there is also another big chunk coming back to what I was saying about the importance of that point number 2. Why does this matter? Because of what it's going to do for the discipline. These are the changes for these specific disciplines that this piece of research is going to accomplish, right? So I think, amongst other things, this funding application was probably more successful because it was better written. Okay, and it communicated things a lot better to my readers. And so that's where I'd like to leave it for today. Basically, the key point, whether you're writing your funding proposal for a job application or whether you're writing your funding proposal, sorry, your research application for a funding application, there are key elements which are in common. And the one that I would stress to you more than anything else is to really know who your readers are and to really bear them in mind and to make sure you're communicating as clearly as possible to them. Right, thank you. I look forward to your questions and comments later on.